Welcome to today's deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Have you ever been listening to a piece of music, maybe a driving rock anthem or, a hip-hop track commanding the crowd to move, and wondered how that exact DNA was formed?
Right. Or how massive cultural movements actually get their names.
Exactly. So today, we are pulling from a fascinating Wikipedia article detailing the brief, explosive, and frankly staggering life of Clarence Smith, better known as Pinetop Smith.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. Our mission with this deep dive is to explore how a young man in the 1920s accidentally named a colossal musical genre, laid the rhythmic groundwork for rock and roll, and created a cultural ripple effect that has lasted a century.
All before his tragic death at just 24 years old.
Yeah, 24.
It is a remarkable narrative. And what we are really looking at today is the anatomy of a cultural paradigm shift. We are examining how a single, highly specific recording can fundamentally alter the trajectory of popular music. It serves as a perfect case study, demonstrating that innovation rarely happens in a sterile, isolated laboratory. Instead, it happens in the crowded, sweaty, urgent reality of everyday life. When those raw moments get captured on wax, they have the power to change the world.
So let's set the scene and go back to his origins. Clarence Smith was born on June 11th, 1904, down in Pike County, Alabama.
Deep South.
Very much so. Now, diving into the sources, there's actually a bit of a historical debate regarding the exact town of his birth. Some records claim he was born in Troy, Alabama, while others point to Orion.
Which is a smaller community just north of Troy.
Right. The Wikipedia article notes that his family definitely lived in Orion when he was born and then relocated to Troy shortly after.
Which is incredibly common when researching early 20th century Southern history, especially regarding Black families in rural areas.
Because of the record keeping.
Yeah, exactly. The meticulous record-keeping we expect today simply wasn't afforded to those communities at the time. But regardless of where the exact municipal lines were drawn, his foundation was firmly rooted in the rural South.
He was an Alabama kid through and through.
Yeah.
And the source provides this fantastic, really humanizing detail early on. He earned the nickname Pinetop simply because he loved climbing trees as a child.
I love that detail.
Me too.
Yeah.
It instantly strips away the mythology and grounds him. You aren't just reading about a foundational architect of American music. You are picturing this adventurous kid scrambling up pine trees in the oppressive Alabama heat.
It creates a brilliant juxtaposition. You have this image of an innocent kid in the pines, but his surroundings and his reality were about to change drastically and rapidly.
Because he doesn't stay there.
No, he doesn't. As a teenager, his family moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and then in 1920, he made a massive geographic and cultural leap up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Which places him squarely within the currents of the Great Migration.
Exactly. He was stepping out of the agrarian South and directly into the booming industrial North. Pittsburgh in 1920 was a major cultural crossroads, teeming with new money, industrial workers, and a rapidly expanding nightlife.
A perfect incubator.
Yes, this environment is where he truly begins his hustle as a working entertainer.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because his time as an entertainer in this era wasn't just about sitting quietly at a piano in the corner of a polite room. He started touring on the TOBA Circuit.
The Theater Owners Booking Association.
Right. For those of you who might not be familiar with the acronym, it was essentially the premier and often grueling vaudeville circuit for Black entertainers at the time. And the sources make it clear that surviving on this circuit required serious versatility.
You could not survive as a one-trick pony on the TOBA circuit. The crowds were demanding, the schedules were punishing, and the pay often required you to be a master of all trades.
So he wasn't just playing piano.
Not at all. Pinetop wasn't just a pianist. The historical record highlights that he was a singer and a comedian, touring and accompanying absolute royalty of the blues.
We are talking about legends like Ma Rainey.
Yes, Ma Rainey and the famous comedy duo Butterbeans and Susie.
But how does that vaudeville background actually translate to the musical legacy we are talking about today? I mean, it's one thing to do crowd work in a packed theater, but it seems like a different skill set entirely to sit down and invent a musical genre.
That is the critical bridge. His background in comedy and vaudeville crowd work directly informed the interactive architecture of the music he would soon record.
Oh, because he knew how to work a room.
Precisely. Working with acts like Butterbeans and Susie taught him timing, pacing, and how to hold a restless audience in the palm of his hand. He learned how to talk to a room, how to command attention, and how to make the audience feel like they were part of the performance.
This makes so much sense.
When he eventually transitions to recording, he doesn't leave that showmanship at the door. He bakes it directly into the vinyl.
That makes the timeline even more compelling. Jump forward to the mid-1920s. Pinetop has survived the vaudeville crucible. He's built a reputation, and networking starts to play a crucial role. A fellow musician, the brilliantly named Cal Davenport.
Great name.
Incredible name. Cal Davenport recognizes Pinetop's unique talent and recommends him to J. Mayo Williams of Vocalion Records.
A major label.
Huge. This connection catalyzes a massive life event. In 1928, Pinetop packs up, moves his wife and young son to Chicago, Illinois, with the explicit goal of recording his music.
What's fascinating here is the sheer density of talent he immerses himself in upon arriving in Chicago. When Pinetop Smith moves to the city in 1928, he doesn't just rent an isolated apartment. He moves his family into a rooming house.
Right.
And living in that exact same rooming house are Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis.
It's almost unbelievable. You essentially have the three foundational pillars of Boogie Woogie piano all living under a single roof.
Precisely. It functioned as an impromptu Boogie Woogie think tank. When you consider the layout of a 1928 Chicago rooming, house-cramped quarters, thin walls, shared spaces, the cross-pollination of ideas must have been staggering.
They couldn't escape each other's music.
No, they couldn't. You have these three giants of the piano, likely hearing each other practice through the floorboards, inadvertently pushing each other, refining their heavy left-hand techniques, and competing in an environment of constant musical osmosis.
It paints such a vivid picture of the creative pressure cooker he was operating in. And all of that kinetic energy translates directly into the recording studio. On December 29, 1928, Pinetop goes into the Vocalion studio and tracks what would become his absolute masterpiece.
A historic session.
It's a song he claims he originally improvised while playing at a packed house rent party back in St. Louis, Missouri. He titles the track Pinetop's Boogie Woogie.
And we really need to pause on that title.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because looking at the historical data, this was the very first recording to have the phrase Boogie Woogie in the title. Yes, ever. Furthermore, it is the first known use of the term on a commercial record, period. He literally cemented the name of the genre in that single session.
Before December 1928, musicians across the country were playing variations of this driving, heavy-handed, ostinato-based piano style, but it was fractured.
It didn't have a banner to rally under.
Exactly. It was a regional sound without a unified, universal brand. By pressing that phrase onto a Vocalion 78 RPM record, Pinetop Smith gave the entire movement a moniker that stuck permanently.
But the revolution of this track goes far beyond the title printed on the label, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the internal anatomy of the recording itself. He took the chaotic, sweaty, interactive energy of a St. Louis rent party and somehow distilled it into a studio recording.
If you listen to Pinetop's Boogie Woogie, you immediately realize it isn't a passive listening experience. Pinetop actively talks over his own piano playing.
He's the master of ceremonies.
He is directing the invisible dancers in the room. He calls out specific instructions, looking for the girl with the red dress on. He commands her to not move a peg until he gives the word, and then he instructs the room to shake that thing and mess around. He is literally puppeteering the party from behind the piano.
Which is exactly where his vaudeville crowd work manifests. He isn't just playing music, he is hosting an event.
And it feels incredibly modern. If you think about the culture of modern music, whether you are at a club listening to a DJ cut the beat to tell the crowd to jump, or listening to a hip-hop hype track, you are participating in a tradition that Pinetop Smith was blueprinting in 1928. He invented the interactive dance track.
He absolutely did, and the musical architecture supporting those vocal commands is equally profound.
Let's get into the music theory side of it.
The source material emphasizes that the song features highly strategic rhythmic breaks. Rather than just playing a continuous loop, Pinetop utilizes these moments of suspended rhythm.
Stopping the momentum.
Right, dropping the bottom out of the track to create a vacuum of tension before crashing back in with that relentless left hand. These breaks were a tool inherited from ragtime, but the way Pinetop weaponized them alongside his syncopated treble melodies was a fundamental foreshadowing of rock and roll.
It's the manipulation of kinetic energy.
Yeah.
He's using the syncopation and those sudden stops to physically force a reaction out of the dancers.
Exactly. The driving bass line, the rebellious energy, the tension and release, it is the exact rhythmic DNA that would eventually evolve into rock music. When historians map the roots of rock and roll, that December 1928 session is a massive glowing waypoint.
And you can track that direct lineage to the legends who followed. Look at Ray Charles.
Oh, definitely.
When Ray Charles was building his own massive hits decades later, he knew exactly which cultural reservoir to draw from. He used those exact same lyrical commands around, what I say, because he understood the primal power of Pinetop's blueprint.
So by early 1929, Pinetop Smith is riding an incredible wave of momentum. Following the success of his Boogie Woogie anthem, he records several more 78 RPM singles for Vocalion.
Capitalizing on the hit.
Yeah, he lays down tracks with incredibly evocative titles like I'm Sober Now, Jump Steady Blues, and Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. Vocalion recognizes they have a burgeoning star, and he is scheduled for another major recording session to capitalize on his rising fame.
He never makes it to that session.
No.
The trajectory of his life and potentially the accelerated evolution of American music hits a violent wall. On March 15th, 1929, Clarence Pinetop Smith was shot and killed during a fight in a Chicago dance hall.
Just devastating.
This is the exact day before he was scheduled to be back in the Vocalion studio. He was 24 years old.
It is a devastating pivot in the narrative, and the sources point to a thick layer of tragedy and mystery surrounding the event.
Because it wasn't even his fight, was it?
Accounts differ on the specific mechanics of the brawl, but several sources suggest Pinetop wasn't even the intended target of the gunfire. He may have simply been tragic collateral damage in a chaotic room he had no part in fighting in.
To survive the grueling vaudeville circuits, to finally get your family to Chicago, to name a genre, and then to be taken out by a stray bullet at 24, it's difficult to process.
And it was incredibly difficult for the musical community to process at the time. How do you reconcile the sudden, violent erasure of a man who was the literal architect of the party? The shockwaves were palpable.
I can only imagine.
To give you a sense of how deeply this scarred the jazz and blues world, consider that a full 10 years later, in 1939, Downbeat magazine ran a retrospective headline about the incident. It didn't focus on his musical theory or his record sales. The headline simply read, "I saw Pinetop spit blood."
Wow, that is visceral. It strips away all the glamour of the jazz age and leaves you with the brutal reality of the nightlife they were operating in.
It really does.
And despite his massive contribution to culture, it took an embarrassingly long time for him to receive proper physical recognition. He lay in an unmarked grave for decades.
A terrible oversight.
It wasn't until 2014, 85 years after his death, that the Killer Blues Headstone Project finally placed a proper monument for him at Restvale Cemetery in Elsip, Illinois.
While the physical headstone in 2014 provided long overdue closure, there was also a conceptual monument proposed for Pinetop decades earlier that captures his essence perfectly.
Yes, the Claes-Oldenburg proposal. I am absolutely obsessed with this detail from the source. Claes-Oldenburg, the renowned pop artist famous for his massive public installations, proposed a monument for Pinetop in a book covering his project ideas between 1965 and 1969.
It wasn't a traditional statue.
Not at all. He didn't propose a traditional bronze statue of a man sitting at a piano. Instead, Oldenburg proposed running a wire the entire length of North Avenue in Chicago. It would extend west from Clark Street all the way to Larrabee Street.
And Larrabee Street is the crucial detail there, as that was the intersection where the dance hall was located and where Pinetop was murdered.
Exactly. And this wouldn't just be an inert wire. Oldenburg proposed that an electric impulse would run through it colored blue. So you would have this long, continuous, visually striking blue line pulsing down the street as far as the eye could see. And Oldenburg explicitly described this conceptual wire as being blue and dangerous.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is arguably the most fitting tribute imaginable. A static marble column or a quiet bronze plaque feels antithetical to a man who invented a genre entirely based on kinetic movement.
That's too quiet.
Right. But a live, pulsing, dangerous blue wire that physicalizes the raw electric energy of the early blues. It embodies the high-voltage danger of the speakeasies and dance halls he inhabited, the electric spark of his musical genius, and the sudden, shocking way his current was cut short. It is the blues made manifest.
And even though the man himself was gone, that electric pulse he generated just kept traveling. The posthumous boom of his music was absolutely staggering. Other heavyweight pianists of the era, like Pete Johnson, openly cited Pinetop as a primary influence, carrying his rhythmic theories forward.
The Whipple effect is where this tragedy transitions into a triumph of legacy. Let's examine what happens in 1938. Big band leader Tommy Dorsey decides to arrange a full orchestral version of Pinetop's Boogie Woogie.
Bringing it to a massive new audience.
Yes. Initially, it wasn't an overnight sensation, but as the globe plunged into World War II, that specific arrangement exploded in popularity. It went on to become Tommy Dorsey's best-selling record, moving over 5 million copies.
Why do you think that specific track resonated so deeply with an America that was engulfed in a world war? What was it about a 1920s St. Louis rent party song that captured the zeitgeist of the 1940s?
It comes down to the psychology of the rhythm. During World War II, America was an industrial machine operating at maximum capacity, and the culture required an escapism that matched that relentless, forward-moving momentum.
They needed something driving.
Precisely. Pinetop's driving, four-to-the-bar rhythm offered exactly that. It was optimistic, it was unyielding, and it forced you to move. It provided a kinetic release for a population under immense psychological pressure. A song designed to cut through the noise of a crowded rooming house was perfectly engineered to cut through the anxiety of a global conflict.
That makes perfect sense. 5 million copies in that era is an astronomical figure, and the industry recognized the power of that blueprint. Heavyweights like Bing Crosby recorded a version in 1946 alongside the Lionel Hampton Orchestra.
Count Basie put out his own interpretation, too.
Right. The song essentially developed a life entirely independent of its creator. And then you have the musicians who literally adopted his identity to ensure the music stayed alive.
The legacy of the name itself is fascinating. Starting in the 1950s, a talented pianist named Joe Willie Perkins recorded his own version of Pinetop's Boogie Woogie. From that moment on, he became universally known in the industry as Pinetop Perkins.
Talk about a tribute.
He adopted the moniker and carried it for the rest of his extensive career, eventually becoming the legendary pianist for Muddy Waters.
I love that he didn't run from the comparison. He leaned into it.
He wore it like a badge of honor. He lived to be a very old man, and the source notes a brilliant moment from his 2004 album, Ladies' Man. In his 90s, Pinetop Perkins actually recorded a track where he jokingly addresses the widespread misconception that he had written the original Boogie Woogie anthem. He playfully sets the record straight that the genius belonged to Clarence Smith.
That is a beautiful full-circle tribute. And the influence didn't just stay confined to traditional blues or big band. We see it jump across completely different genres. We already discussed Ray Charles adapting the lyrics for Mess Around, which, as a fun side note from the sources, was officially credited to a writer named A. Nujatre.
Which is just Atlantic Records founder Ahmet Ertegun's name spelled backward.
I love that little trivia. But beyond R&B, the jazz world kept returning to him. In 1975, the Bob Thiele Orchestra released a modern jazz album that took its title directly from that visceral downbeat headline, calling the record I Saw Pinetop Spit Blood, featuring a modernized treatment of his Boogie Woogie.
And the lineage continues straight into the 21st century, with artists like Gene Taylor releasing covers as recently as 2003. It proves that every successive generation of musicians, regardless of their specific genre, eventually finds their way back to that December 1928 recording session.
It's unavoidable.
Whether they are playing traditional blues, swinging big band, or modern rock, they are unknowingly tapping into the electric current that Pinetop Smith wired directly into the cultural mainframe.
So what does this all mean? We have spent this time looking at a young man who died at 24 years old, leaving behind only a small handful of recordings. Yet his structural impact on American music was so profound that decades later, in 1991, he was posthumously inducted into the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame. He left behind a legacy that is truly, undeniably immortal.
It means that profound innovation does not strictly require a long runway. Sometimes, true cultural shifts are born from a single moment of unfiltered, joyful connection. Think about the core of what we've explored with you today. A young man trying to entertain his friends in a cramped St. Louis apartment. He wasn't trying to invent rock and roll, he was just trying to make the room sweat.
He wanted the girl in the red dress to shake that thing.
Exactly. And that simple, localized act of creation managed to outlive him by a century, naming a global genre and laying the rhythmic foundation for the music you listen to today.
It is staggering to think about how much of our modern culture is built on the foundation of a 24-year-old's house party.
It is. But it also forces us to consider the inverse, and this is the thought I want to leave you with today. We are incredibly lucky that Cow Davenport introduced Pinetop to Vocalion Records. We are lucky that his genius was captured on wax just 3 months before a stray bullet took his life.
Just 3 months.
But if the inventor of rock and roll's rhythmic DNA was recorded purely by chance, in the absolute final days of his life, how many other foundational geniuses from that era were permanently lost to history? How many other brilliant pioneers of the TOBA circuit, whose musical innovations are still pulsing through our culture today, will we never know the names of, simply because they never had the chance to step in front of a studio microphone?
That is a haunting and powerful question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary, electric, and far too brief life of Pinetop Smith. We appreciate you taking the time to unpack this history with us, and we look forward to sharing our next discovery with you. Until then, keep listening and keep exploring the roots of the music you love.